One thing I've learned, if you don't hold their feet to the fire, everybody gets burned.
Hold on. Before you start waving around that freedom of speech thing, when you're at a crowded movie theater and you scream fire, you better be able to smell smoke. You come on this radio show and you start saying incandescent things like that, you better have more behind you, pal, than just your thumb. I've been listening to talk radio for years, and one thing I just can't stand is when the host has to, push his way on the people, beat the callers into his way of thinking, extending his ego, or when the callers call in and say something so outrageous and the host lets it go unchallenged. The sign you're on the road to truth is the lack of contradiction. You want to find truth, you just don't simply believe somebody because of their authority or their degree, or you listen to what they say, you test it against reality, and you hold their feet to the fire. All right. We're back and we are live. Feet to the Fire Radio. I'm your host, James Othayanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio. What a title, huh? I was trying to think of a title for this because, I don't know, it's just things that are going on are just unbelievable. Just the thing here. How's that? Better? Better. What's going on out there is absolutely amazing. And as I mentioned before, I have been a student, but I would say it in like a hobby grade level of prophecy, end times prophecy and whatnot, going back to Dr. Jack Van Impe back in the 70s, who, by the way, just passed away this past week. He was 87, I think. I tell you, he was your hell and brimstone preacher, but I got to give him credit. He not a single scandal his whole life. In fact, the only scandal he had was when he stood up for those who were believers who weren't independent, hardcore, fundamentalist Baptists, even like the Catholics. He mentions there are people who are Catholic who are saved, whether they know it or not, based on the doctrine, and he lost a lot of his sponsors. It became, the Catholics were a big joke that were being used by the fundamentalists, kicked around. He said, we shouldn't be doing that. And he ended up losing his sponsorship, went off the air. He was on the radio for a long time and then television, and went bankrupt. And it would work his way back from that, back onto the air, back preaching again. Then he ends up having a major, what was it? It wasn't a stroke. It was, went to a coma. And the doctors left him for dead, and his wife, Rexella, stayed by his side day after day after day. I went on week after week after week after week, and he woke up and started talking. And he went back on the air, back preaching again. It would be worth going back to some of the videos that are on Jack Van Impe Presents to see him in his 87th, all fired up. But I'm telling you, I disagreed, and as I mentioned, I wrote a little thing about it. I disagreed humbly with a lot of some of the theology. I'm not a pre-trib rapture guy. He is definitely. But you can't argue with the guy on the basics and how he stuck to it, lived the walk, talk walk the talk, as I guess the word would be. So, but it is, he had a revelation when he was coming back from his coma. God wanted him to preach, to do kind of like a last call, because Jesus was coming any day now. Now he was, he's passed away now, and Jesus hasn't come, but he still may, and who knows how it all works out. I wouldn't be surprised, especially the vision that I had where Jesus coming back, the sky opening up like a scroll in the shape of a V, kind of rolling up, and Jesus stepped across onto the ground from the V, and there was a V-shaped line of saints coming with him. Wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Jack is in that group. But anyway, going back to this prophecy stuff, one of the problems I've had over the years when I was studying it is there have been many people, many times over the years, where they thought they were living in the latter days, and they turned out they didn't. I mean, the most recent example you may remember is Harold Camping, who was a pastor. He said that 2012 was when Jesus was going to come, and he figured it out from the Bible. And I remember him from 94, 84. I don't remember. 1984, I think it was. He said Jesus was coming. And then when he didn't come, he said, well, there was no year zero, so it was actually 1985. He didn't come. And I thought that was the end of him, but lo and behold, he popped up again in 2012 saying the same thing. And when it didn't happen, he did the whole, well, it must be next year then. And when it didn't happen, when he didn't come, he ended up having a stroke and dying shortly thereafter. He was pretty old. So I'm not going to, hold on here. Oh, I had to sneeze. If I would have blown up all my levels would have went flying. So, these end times and all that gets kicked around a lot, and it gets misinterpreted. And again, if you are a fan of the pre-trib rapture, that is, Jesus comes before the tribulation, pre-tribulation rapture, I'm not going to argue about that point. I would love it. So, if it happens, great. But I want to talk about what's happening. There's this tribulation area, and talk about what's going on in the world in reference to the predictions. Now, I'm not talking about Revelation. I'm talking about Jesus' words that are recorded in three locations in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Scholars think that Luke was the first one written, and that perhaps Matthew and Mark, or Matthew and Luke, may have used Mark's works. All that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, it's not like, it doesn't mean anything. It's all. But the point being is that this stuff is in all three of them. And while the quotes aren't exact, it makes sense. You have three different people reporting what they heard in as they wrote it down. Because if we had, now I'm talking about professional scribes who can type stuff down exactly, but if you have three people listening and they write it down, you might get a word here or there, but the gist of it that hits you, the gravity of it will come through, and it does. It does. So if people are saying, well, we're in these end times, well, let's look at some other things that happened. And my favorite go-to is Sodom and Gomorrah. In that time, Lot was sent in. Lot said, "Hey, God says he's going to destroy the city. It's full of debauchery, etc." And Lot says, "What about all his people in there?" And he whittles them down to, "I won't destroy the city if you can find 10 righteous people," which, of course, he doesn't find, but he does take the few with him out while the city's destroyed. So I'm thinking, like, okay, so what was so bad in Sodom and Gomorrah that it was destroyed versus today? And some of the things that pop up to me, this is something I have mentioned before, but some of the things that pop up to me is the debauchery at the time. I think I could say that we got it worse. Now, I don't know how universal. It gives me the impression that the debauchery that was in Sodom and Gomorrah was perhaps more universal that the number of people who didn't participate in some of these things were a small number, or those who, it was just kind of accepted behavior in that area. And referring to sex with, children and strange flesh. They wanted the angels, all this real debauchery, not just simply promiscuous, but different species, and whatnot. So it was pretty bad. And it really, what it comes down to is back then, I would say Sodom and Gomorrah could be summed up in do as thou wilt. To quote the common phrase from, of course, now I can see his face, with those staring eyes, and I can't see the name. That's just a thing I have for those who've been listening for a while know that when I see a face, I can't say the name, but it'll come. This is what I think the deal is when it becomes do as thou wilt becomes the normal accepted way of things, and the people literally push that wilt out as far as one can. That is when you're getting into dangerous waters. And so looking back at it, not to take isolated incidents, people talk about gay and whatnot, it's worse than that. I mean, that's not the end point. It is beyond all of that. I mean, so it's worse. So using that idea, pulling it forward to now, do as thou wilt, to the point of we have, just in the last few years, this goes back to the election, with the Trump election. What came out of the left's mouth was startling to me at the end of the Obama era, where they wanted to have people who can go into the woman's john if they feel like they're a woman, though they're a man, though they have a genitalia of a man, they can go in there, which is absolutely outrageous. It's been like that for the beginning of time. That you have, you got Mark checking in the chat room at Spreaker. Hey, Mark. From the beginning of time, you've had the separation like that. And only in the most debauchery times you've crossed those lines. And again, Sodom and Gomorrah is an example. So what we have now at the end of the Obama reign, I'm just using it kind of like a time frame. You have these things coming out that are startling. Like when I first heard him saying this directive about using the bathroom, I was startled. I'm like, what? That's my first wake-up call that I got, that this is something really wrong, not just political stuff. This is like, wait a minute. This is crossing some major lines here. So when that happened, it started to go downhill fast. So when you have the Trump coming in, you have now it goes from abortion was meant they wanted it to be legal. It was looked at as something that you'd done quietly. It was something that was not it wasn't a goal. It solved problems. It wasn't something that you were happy about. It was quiet. You put it away. Now you have people saying they can't wait to have their abortions. You can't have people who talk about abortion in terms of sexual foreplay is ended with an abortion, part of the sex routine. These are outrageous things that, I'm 62. Never have we heard these things in public, in mainstream communications, ever, all my life. Is it possible that somebody thought those things in the past? Yeah, it's very possible, but it was quiet. It was not something bragged about, boasted about, pushed out there. It's ridiculous. All right, so now we have that. We have the transgender deal where they are now taking, kids used to be, kids couldn't be exposed to X-rated material or, R-rated films and all that. You kept kids away from that because you didn't want messing with their head while they're growing up and growing into puberty. Right? So they were protected. You couldn't do it. You couldn't talk with them. You couldn't have this stuff. And now you got the documented cases of the transgender story time stuff. It's like, huh? What? It's not a question about being tolerant for those who are transgender. Anybody can do what they want. I don't care. When it comes to that, a personal thing, I'm not going to agree with it. I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to say it's okay, but I'm not going to go out hunting them down. No, you do what you want. But it's always been the outside of society where these things happened and were tolerated quietly, and you had to go out there somewhere and hide about it. You had to do it in private. You had little groups. You had. I'm reminded of Perry Mason is one of my favorite shows. I like it now, even to this day. I watch the shows. They have the DVDs of them, and I'm reminded that the prosecutor in there, William Towsman, who played Hamburger, what a name, Hamilton Burger. He was excuse me, he was dropped from the show because he was arrested at a party where they were, and the actual charge was gambling about, which is, it's not gambling, like a gamboling, B-O-L, and it means dancing around without clothes. And marijuana was present. This is back in the early 60s, mid-60s, early 60s. It was such a shock and an outrage that he ended up being dropped from the show, and it took fans writing in, and Raymond Burr, who played Perry Mason, throwing his weight around to get him back on. But those things happened, but they were quiet. And when it broke out into the mainstream, oh my gosh, right? Don't ask, don't tell, as Mark says. So when it broke out into the mainstream, it was like, my God, what? Well, we have to laugh at those things by today's standards, where you have people applauding about having abortions. Can't wait for them. Was one actress talking about how it defined her, it liberated her, allowed her to win an award because she wasn't pregnant. And you have people talking about it for, like I said, for sexual things. You have people actually shouting it out and proud for these things. You have the transgender stuff where people are now getting kids to do this, and parents have their kids taking drugs to block their puberty, which will screw them up royally. Those drugs were used at some point where people would have like if it was a girl, and she'd have too much testosterone, she'd start to get big boned, and it would interfere with it, so they would taper back during a small time period and let it go and all that. Well, now you're just stopping puberty altogether. It's ridiculous. And if you say these things, you get in trouble. Like, for example, Feet to the Fire Radio, that website cannot be cited on Facebook. And the only thing I could think of was some comments I made about the transgenderism. So it's, it's something that you just can't talk about. And so it went from something you wouldn't talk about in public, but is done privately and quiet, to now the people who don't go along with it are the ones who have to be private and quiet. I don't have to tell you in the privacy and quietness. So look for this eventually someday. This thing to be stopped. And I'm not out there being real, melodramatic, and I'm not doing big drama about it. We're having a talk here, an intellectual discussion on it. So you have the breakdown of this. You have what's going on now with Trump. I mean, forget Trump, whether or not you like him or not. What's happening to him is unprecedented in history. Well, it may have happened in back doors. I mean, Kennedy was killed, right? And there was politics involved there. I read a book, Roger Stone, who said it was Lyndon Johnson who was behind it on there and so on. So, I mean, it's not like this stuff didn't happen. It was quiet. Now they're out in open, making up complete and utter lies. You have video which shows the lies to be wrong, and you have video of the politicians taking the exact opposite stance that they took before, and those videos can't be seen because a lot of it gets taken away from YouTube or Facebook. But more importantly, the media, the mainstream media, won't do it. Their job is to hold people's feet to the fire, and they won't do it. And they'll make up stuff to lay on the opposition to them. So it's gotten to the point where lies are now being put as truth and truth as lies, along with the debauchery that's going on and the do as thou wilt. Passing tax laws in California is crumbling. You have all these things happen. It's amazing. But let me get to me get to some of this. Now I'm gonna read some stuff here from Mark. I like that it was just very, very direct. But there's a certain phrase in there that I quoted in the actual description from this cast that we'll get to eventually. But that description is going to be the main focus. So what I'm going to get to. That Jesus was going outside the temple, and they were bragging about the buildings, and he goes, "Oh, these buildings are going to be torn down." And they're like, "What?" So Peter, James, John, and Andrew were questioning him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the signs when all these things will be fulfilled?" But Jesus began to say, "See that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and he will mislead many." Now, let me stop there. It's very important grammatically when you look into this. When Jesus has said, "Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he.'" Now, it could mean they say that I am Jesus, that this person is coming in Jesus' name saying, "I am Jesus," or Christ consciousness, or some variant of it, or they could come in his name saying that Jesus is the one. So they could be Christians, and they will mislead many. So you gotta take, when you read this stuff, you gotta look at it, and since it's not specifically said one way, you have to consider both when you're looking at this if you want to not miss anything. No harm in doing that. In fact, all it does is make it richer. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. Those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation. Now, let me take the word nation and say race. Because when you have nationality, you're talking about basically what tribe you're coming from. A kingdom is more of a government. A king could have many nationalities under his kingdom. Or a kingdom can be set up of one nationality or a majority nationality. But I think what it means here is that race will rise up against race. Kingdom or countries will rise against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. Right? Well, I was reading a column by Less Visible that I commented on. He talked about, in his opinion, he thought that there'd be a lot of earthquakes before the return of Christ. And he thought there a lot of shaking was going on. And he wrote that like 2 days later, it had a bunch of major earthquakes and volcanoes went off. I mean, to me, a volcano going off is similar to an earthquake in its makeup. And they cause earthquakes when they go up. So either way you look at it, there'll be earthquake in various places. There will also be famines. And of course, there's, all you have to do is watch any kind of cable show for any amount of time, and you'll see the commercials for the ministries trying to help the people who are starving. These are merely the beginnings of birth pangs. If you want to look at the delivery of the child, so to speak, as being the return, the actual result of this ending, you're just having, I shouldn't say just, but you're having contractions, let's say birth pangs. But be on your guard during this time. All these things are happening. It's mirror birth pangs. You kind of look at it. It's kind of doing an overview of a current situation. The wars and rumors of wars is not the culmination. It's not the nation and rise up against nation. It's not culmination. These are all parts of the birth that's coming. Be on your guard. They will deliver you to the courts, and you will be flogged in the synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake as testimony to them. Now, what they're saying is that they're going to be persecuted But in that persecution, you as the persecutor will be being a testimony for them. Another phrase I like from Less Visible is he talks about it for purposes of demonstration, is how he explains a lot of the stuff that's going on. And I like that phrase. I agree with him on that phrase, for purposes of demonstration. People will be delivered to courts and flogged in the synagogues. Now, we'll take this in modern times. People are being flogged in various countries. So you have to look at it in a greater context. But in our culture, we're not flogged in the synagogues. Well, it doesn't apply to me then. No, it does. You have to take it and bring it into today's culture. You'll be going to the courts and you'll be punished. Flogging in the synagogue or flogging in a court was a punishment. So you will be punished. For example, I'm just throwing this out there. You'll have a husband and a wife. One's a Christian, one is some kind of Looney Tunes, and they're both fighting for the child one wants to be a transgender, and they'll go to the court, and you'll end up having the Christian individual will lose custody or whatever, Just these kind of things will happen. The people who are standing for righteousness, and it doesn't mean you're a full-blown Christian out there. It's just that you happen to think, well, that's wrong to do this, or this is right to do this, and this is where I'm standing. When you have that point of view and you're asserting that out by simply living it out and just by saying it. Well, I'm going to cough again here. You will be persecuted for that. And we see this now where Christians are being thrown off Facebook and whatnot for saying things. Now, it doesn't mean you can be belligerent about it and be, nasty about it. That's, then you're bringing your own fleshy tendencies. You're just dirtying up Jesus' witnessing and so on. But, I'm talking about people who are, the gospel must be preached to all nations. So the delay that's going on, and we'll hear about this in other ones, the delay is going on so that the gospel, I'm doing another sidetrack here, but a gospel is, what's the gospel? And people, you line up people and they'll give you different answers. The gospel means the good news. And from my assessment, what Jesus was teaching was God is with us, both in a divine presence in Jesus, but in ourselves as well. The good news is, hey, God never left you. He's there. Reach out for him. No, you don't have to be a special race. You don't have to be a special kind of economic class. You don't have to be an aristocrat. You don't have to be declared by a king or a government. You don't have to jump through certain hoops. You are connected with God by creation, by design, and you are being misled away from that. And this is what the devil would wants to do, is to not have you reconnect with God inside you. The way I look at it, and I've done, you want to look up some of my YouTube talks, we have a chord, a line. I hate to use the word chord because then we start talking about meditation in the East versus West. But you go back to God. There's a direct line between you in your physical body, into your mind, soul, back up to God. That's the specialness. That's what humans are special. They all have this direct line, and it can't be severed, but it's being blocked off. And say, no, God, do as you will. Do what you want, the human animal, if you will. Do what you want. Don't do what God wants you to do, because he's just a tyrant. He's just, whatever. And God knows exactly what your human being, has been through, what needs to do and what you want to do. You have to let it flow through. That's the good news. Now, where was I left off? Oh, the gospel must be preached to the rest of the nations. Of course, a lot of it's being watered down and being messed up with. But God tolerates all of that because, let's say 1% gets through, that means 1% of people are getting help by it. It's worth it. And all the rest will be compensated for and worked out later. The pains, gospel. You'll be stand before governors and kings for my sake. As testimony to them, the gospel must be preached to all nations. I mean, it's right there. It's all kind of like it's two different sentences, but same deal. When they arrest you and hand you over, don't worry beforehand about what you're to say. But say whatever is given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but it's the Holy Spirit. Man, is that important. Man, is that important. You can plan on the ways to protect you and your family and all that stuff. That's true. All right. But remember, you are making for purposes of demonstration, if I can use lessons, you're making a stand for God. Your stand may be to be arrested and stand before somebody and make your statement. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? Do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say what is given to you in that hour. You will know what you need to know when it happens. That line has saved me from utter, complete nervousness and going nuts throughout my life. Even in this last time, I talked about it last week, where the company closed, that all these things were closing in on me. What got me through it, even though I didn't do well, I was very upset. What got me through it, though, was knowing that it doesn't mean it's going to work out the way I want to, but it'll work out what's best. And it turned out, the story's not over yet, but it turned out working out pretty good. But when they bring you before them, don't worry about it. And this is where that little line is going to separate the old phrase, the men from the boys, the women from the girls. It's going to separate the believers in heart and soul from the people who just flap the jaws. Because when you are at that position, just imagine they're going to put you up and you have to say something now for the magistrate, whether it be a judge or king. You know what you're going to say. When you're there, when you go to open your mouth, you still don't know what you're going to say. But what comes out will be from that line. It goes from God to you, which is a reason why Satan wants to break that, clutter that, to mess it up so that you don't have the right things to say at the time, to make that witness that will be used in judgment of those who are oppressing you or attacking you. Well, that is giving you, for it was not you who speaks, but is the Holy Spirit. And boys, that's a wonderful line. Brother will betray brother to death, a father his child. Children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. I mean, that already happened in Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, right? So this wouldn't be the first time this happens, but I think the difference is the universality of it. And that's something we'll have to talk about. Are we at that time? Is it becoming universally? And perhaps are we in these latter days? You will be hated by all because of my name, but one who endures to the end will be saved. You will be hated by all because of my name, because of the name of Jesus. And boy, the name of Jesus, does that thing just reverberate, right? You mention Jesus, people tense up. They get a little nervous and, I change the subject and, hey, how about them Bears or whatever, When you mention Jesus, it does a lot of stuff. I mean, I told a story last week about, now I can't remember his name now because I saw his picture. Gosh, Lou Gentili. He used to go out to, closed mental institutions and mass murderers and all that, and he would invoke the name of Jesus, and all these demons would go crazy, and you'd catch it on tape. The name of Jesus throughout all of history, I mean, you take it anywhere. You go into Buddhism, Hinduism, any of these religions, Jesus' teachings are revered because it's truth. Perhaps Orthodox Judaism isn't, but there are a lot who have accepted that stuff in there. But the name Jesus is something, and you will be hated, and we're seeing it now. You're seeing the women's marches, and they're not letting Christians march in the march and whatnot. This is not being hated. I mean, they're going to get you because you're a Christian, just like back in the old days. It's like recycling back to the early first century when they were tracking them down and killing them. I mean, the early Lutherans at the time, the Lutherans and the Anabaptists that came up later on, centuries later, you would have the Lutherans rebaptizing the Anabaptists and drowning them. Like, hey, you need to get baptized. You know, I mean, there's always going to be scumbags everywhere. There's no safety in a name. There's going to be evil blacks, Jews, whites, reds. There's going to be evil in every Christian, Hindu, atheism. There's going to be evil everywhere. So that's why identity politics is so ridiculous, because you can't have a title or an identity and have that mean it's okay. You know, there will be black politicians who will screw black people. You know, it's going to happen. It does happen. It has happened. You can't look at somebody and their identity. You have to look at their works and what they do. Anyway. But when you see the abomination of desolation, now that's a whole big theological argument. I'm not going to get into that. A standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those who are Judea must flee to the mountains. Those who are on the housetop must not go down or go in to get anything from their house. And the one who is in the field must not turn back for his coat. So something is going to happen where it flips and becomes an obvious problem that people who would be in the area or around this must literally run. Now, what the abominable desolation is, I'm sure you can get 100 different people to give 100 different examples, but I'm not worried about that, because the way I look at things is what it meant at that time in a literal sense is a example of what it would mean. There's a principle that would carry on through other cultures. But whatever's coming is going to be so bad that it's like, don't go in and get your coat. Don't go back from the field. Just get out of there. But woe is to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing in those days because of the trauma that's coming. I mean, woe to those who are pregnant. There's people who are pregnant giving abortions up gladly. I mean, that's woe to them when they've realized what's going on. But pray that this might not happen in winter. Boy, is that powerful. Pray that it may not happen in winter when you're out on the run with no clothes, heat. I mean, this is amazing stuff. And this is the big line that I think to me is really powerful. Not that the other ones weren't, but for those days will be a time of tribulation such as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now and never will. So what is coming has never happened since the beginning of the creation until now and never will. Wow. I mean, there's a lot of history has told us a lot of stuff, you know. So I don't think that an event is going to happen, never happened before, in as much as I think the events that will be happening in that time will be universally accepted and evil. Evil will be accepted as good. People will be persecuted, tortured, and killed. And babies killed. It'll be, I mean, this stuff has happened like in North Korea. So it's not that it doesn't happen before. My personal approach is they're talking about a time frame where this stuff will be universally accepted. And even Rome did these things back in the day. In fact, there are people who argue that the Revelation predictions happened under Nero. And I'm saying that what makes the difference between then and now is that it was, while Rome did have a large reach, it was a local event. I think what makes the actual real tribulation time different is it'll be universal event, a worldwide event. There's already people who are starving, dying, not even know if they're going to eat the next day. It's already happening. It has been happening for decades. But it'll become more universally done. It'll be okay to do these things. you will have the kings, the rulers, will stand out there and be doing evil to certain groups of people, and it'll be accepted, it'll be lauded in a universal sense. This is why I think a lot of people are balking against the New World Government, the One World and all this stuff, is because you have this aspects. And you know who's in the crosshairs is going to be, the Christian, the white male American, even though it doesn't, there are black male and black female and Mexican, Hispanic or whatever who fit the bill. It's not literally a race. Of course, they want to make it a race. They want to have race versus race, as it says up earlier on. This is why this identity politics is so bad. But this is what we're looking for, and you could see it coming. And this next line is in the same highlighted group that I have here. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened those days. It's just profound stuff. Unless the Lord had shortened those days. Now, there are people who are saying that the sun's going to get hot. They're going to make the earth's going to speed up so the days are short and all that. No, I just throw all that out. All right, that's your head talking. It's not your heart talking. I think what we're talking about here is if this was allowed to play out in time to its normal conclusion, no life would not be saved. If this time frame, the tribulation, is allowed to play out without divine intervention, no life would be saved. Why is God intervening in this? He seems to be hands off a lot of the time, except for, I mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah here and there. Why is God going to intervene in this tribulation, which will be universally evilly maintained across the whole world and will be seeking to oppress and kill those who are righteous, regardless of what religion or where they come from? But for the sake of the elect, boy, that whole elect is in a whole other theological statement. The elect is where you get ecclesia, ecclesiastical, that kind of. Ecclesia is the Greek. It's like those who are called out, those who have come out of it. So, there's a whole theology from, what was his name? See, I'm bad with these names. Gosh. Where God actually saves those who he chooses, and the rest are damned. So it's predestination, right? And then you have the Arminianism, which is people choose to be saved, and then they have some people they use both. So in my personal way of doing it, there are people who are born into this earth with a job to do and are called to do it, and there are those people on this earth who are growing and learning to make choices, and thus both are met on that. But that is, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to have that be an argument here and throw out the baby with the bathwater here. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chose, he will shorten these days. God is going to intervene in this time so that the end, the obvious and absolute end, destruction of life on earth, does not happen. That is something that, tattoo that in your brain. That's why I don't get involved with the pre-trib, post-trib, rapture, and all this stuff. This is Jesus' words. This is not interpretation over verses in this part and that part and words. This is straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. For those days will be a time of tribulation such that has not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never will. Unless the Lord has shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, He shortened those days. That is where my hope is. That is all my hope is on the statement that God will intervene. Now, God does this in people's lives, too. People say, well, how come this guy has like a miracle healing and this other one doesn't? I don't know the answers to it. I know it all works out in the end. There's purposes and reasons. People are being hauled in before the magistrate and tortured and whatnot. Well, why is that person tortured and the other one isn't? All for purposes of demonstration, all for the growth of the individuals, and all will be compensated for beyond anything they can think of for their service to God. I don't have that verse ready, but look for that. God pays back the picture of a bushel basket running over, pushed down so you could squeeze more in it. That's how God pays back for those who are suffer for his sake. So do as thou wilt, or do as God would have you, because in the end you are better for it. And any of that time, anything that you may have lost will be compensated from beyond. No, there'll be nobody complaining at the end. Oh, you mean I missed this because of that? Nope, no complaints. And then it says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or behold, he is there. Do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise. They will show signs and wonders in the sky. I keep thinking of Project Bluebeam, in order to lead people astray. If possible, the elect. And if possible, meaning that the elect would have been led astray, except it's not possible because they are the elect. But take heed, behold, I've told you everything in advance. Now, that is leading up to the tribulation. In those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken, and there will be the Son of Man coming in the clouds with a great power and glory. And he will send forth his angels and will gather the elect from the four winds to the farthest end of the earth, to the farthest end of heaven. This is what I think it is happening. And you are the salt of the earth. This is what Christians are. You're the salt of the earth. You are supposed to be out there mitigating evil, helping people who have been abused, who have been hurt by evil. That is our job. Our job isn't to be rich, have fun. Nothing wrong with being rich and having fun. Our job is to salt the earth. When the tribulation comes, the Christians, the salted earth, are needed to help through it. This is my theology. Now, I hope I'm wrong. That's fine with me. But this is why I've warned you in advance. Take heed. There will be false Christs and false prophets who will arise and show signs and wonders in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed. Behold, I've told you everything in advance. I put my faith, my instruction, my faith and my instruction comes from Jesus' words. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of it but we have enough. That's another thing people talk about. What about the lost books of the Bible and all this stuff? Whatever editing or redacting took place, it was done in ignorance and stuff that got through because no one knew what it meant anyway, and it's no harm to it. We have plenty here to take us through. Plenty. Don't have to worry about it. There are plenty. So this is what I see in advance coming. Now, enter Q. Oh, it's going to be fine. And people are being chastised for not having faith, as if the faith in this could do something. And I would love it to happen. And it's possible because no one is saying that we're absolutely going into the tribulation. We are headed that way. And unless something changes, we will go that way. In fact, this is what I think Jesus talked about. He's talking about signs of the times, not the times. He didn't say, well, on January 2026, 2020, this is going to happen. Because it's fluid. It's not about a calendar date. It's about a energy system on the planet of evil engulfing the planet. And if you go throughout the Bible, there are many times when you have revivals, you got a good king comes in, tears down the idols from the high places, and they have, years of peace and so forth, But then evil rears up its head. And at some point, evil has to be ultimately removed from separation of good. And this is what the whole thing, whether you want to blame Adam and Eve or if it's a story to explain it, how we're going to look at it, when they chose to eat from the knowledge of the good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the difference between them, what's good, what's evil, I don't know. Well, let's eat this tree and find out. Because you'll be like God. Who knows the difference between good and evil? You want to be like God? That's where they use that do as thou wilt. He doesn't want you to eat the tree because then you'll be like God, knowing what is good and evil. And he told the truth. Now we're learning right now. We're finding out the difference between good and evil. We are in that process. It's been going on for thousands of years, finding out the difference between good and evil. And it comes up to its ultimate culmination where evil appears to win. World domination, world oppression, unspeakable things are accepted as normal and good. Worldwide, not a little patch here and there. Worldwide. That's what we're walking into. And what I think the whole Trump aspect of it is God ripping off the masks to expose good and evil. And Trump is who he's using. When Trump walks in the room, evil takes the opposite approach. Doesn't matter what it is. No matter how crazy it is. Ripping kids out of the womb. Letting them die in buckets. Doesn't matter. It's our freedom. It's our will. I wilt this. And so if you can thank Trump for anything, he's been the catalyst to simply rip all this evil, which has been under the covers, nice and hidden, to rip it out in open and all its anti-glory. And this is what's coming, and what you see happening with the impeachments and all these things are happening are just more ways of showing the obvious lying actions of trying to shut this guy up, to get this energy out. But now the cat's out of the bag. So whether Trump is not elected again or he's killed or he's impeached, it doesn't matter. The cat's out of the bag. If it becomes all evil people, it'll be like lightning bolts. They'll be passing laws and doing stuff like lightning bolts. So yes, we still have to fight. It doesn't say you sit back. It doesn't say on here, well, when these days come, just sit back and wait for me to come back and set things right. Doesn't say that. We're supposed to be there living out the teachings of God, the teachings of Jesus, teachings of God through Jesus during these times, so that when these people come up and say, hey, it's okay to have your kid be a transgender, we say, no, it isn't okay. No, it's wrong. You are harming an innocent child, which is the absolute worst thing you can do. The true religion is this: visiting the widows and orphans in their trouble. Not giving them trouble, not creating it. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Now, you can do it. You can do it in not in your own flesh. You don't get glory from it. You don't use the opportunity of it to make a brand for yourself and start going out there and in the strength of your ego stand against God, because that will fail. That will be revealed. You have to do it quietly and humbly. Just like it says, don't worry about what you say. Just worry about, if I can add my 2 cents, don't worry about what you're going to say. Worry about being available for God. Having that opening, being like, yeah, I want to do what you're going to do. Read Jesus' words and tells you how to do this stuff. This is the real deal. I just looked in the chat room. I got Bruce McDonald in there. Hey, Bruce. This is what we have to look for. We can't trust in men. humans, if I can use the more politically correct version. We can't trust in humanity. You can't trust in Republicans. You can't trust in Democrats. You can't even in Trump has his problems. He's a human, and he's a sinner like everyone else. What's good about Trump is he's embracing God in what he's doing, but also his mannerisms, his fleshliness of it is actually being used as a tool to flesh out and show the people who are evil in heart. Give me a gruff, honest person over a polished liar any day of the week. It doesn't mean they're not infallible, but it means that you can trust them more in terms of their word and humanity. But let me say these lines again. For those days will be a time of tribulation. That tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of creation, which God created until now, and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened those days. I mean, write this down. I'm telling you what to do. Just write it down, make a poster, put it in your house, and see those words. For those days will be a time of tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened those days. Days are coming. I don't know if they'll get here. Because, again, we could have some kind of a revival, and it turns back evil and until another cycle comes. But each cycle, as you look throughout time and you see these evil cycles, they become more and more powerful in the world. If you want to look at World War II as an example, all right, it did a lot of trauma here, right? And so the next war, what is it? The next war, I think, would be more of a spiritual war, more of a war underneath, where it's eating out of the actual core of things. That's the next war, and we're in that war. We're in a war now. It's a war for the deterioration of the mind and the disconnection of the soul. And again, I don't want to get into the big theology about what happens afterwards and all this stuff. I'm dealing with what's going on now. Here we are now. We have to stay grounded. We have to know what it actually takes following Jesus' teachings. I don't trust anybody except Jesus. I don't even trust the disciples. There's plenty of things in the disciples that are acting up. They did good stuff, and then they messed up. I'm assuming they got better as time went on. But why would I listen to a preacher who's in a church because he's ordained by someone else when I got Jesus telling me right here, and this stuff has been around forever. People talk about the Bible, can't trust it. They have found fragments that have been scientifically dated into the within the first century down into decades. You got Paul's writings in particular has been validated by atheistic scholars as being actually written by Paul during the early decades. There's plenty of proof. There's not proof that Jesus actually said these things in terms of, we found his handwriting, or, you can't do it like in a court of law, but it's been so reasonably accepted. And then when you apply them in your life, you see things happening. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not here criticizing Q or I'm supporting him. Q is a shadow. Q is something behind a wall somewhere saying things that are tickling the ears. Paul wrote to Timothy, beware of the doctrines of people who tickle your ears. Yeah, I want stuff to happen. Yeah, I want the bad guys to get arrested. Yeah, I want the things to be cleaned up. I want that really bad. I would love to have them all arrested and brought up the evidence and tried and found guilty, put in prison, or even executed. Fine. I would, But here's a warning I would say, is that what Trump is got a limited lifespan. I mean, he's got one more term if he wins, and that's it. And he may die. The next guy in line to pick up the Trump mantle is the guy to worry about. We may be looking at all this stuff, and we may be looking at Clinton and these other people and saying, yeah, those are the bad guys. It's very possible that because of all their evilness and all their just outright badness, that the pendulum swings into the next guy after Trump becoming a dictator and rooting out these other people. And you do have then another actual real kind of a Hitler character. That's what could come from this too. The pendulum swinging, and we go, you know what? Screw our rights and so forth, and that we just need to get rid of these bad guys. They're so bad. We'll suspend them temporarily. You'll just arrest them all that. And then all of a sudden, the suspension doesn't get lifted. And then it's like, well, I think we'll keep it this way. Remind me about Castro. Oh, when we win, I'll step down. We'll have elections or whatever. Well, he died stepping down. That's it. Once the people get into power, it's a whole different ballgame. That's why George Washington looked at it was such a good guy, because he walked away after his term. He could have stayed. There was no limiting it, and he said, no, we don't want another king. And he walked away from it. He walked away from power. That's really a good thing. That's a good character test for someone to walk away from power. If I just had a little more power, then I can get rid of these bad guys. And now you have the setting up the new. Remember the old king, the kings of old in the Old Testament. They had revivals. They did all this stuff, and then their kids came on the throne and became super evil. This is why these cycles will continue until we actually have the real tribulation and God comes in to save the world from being destroyed. It's going to, so if we get out of it this time, when's the next cycle? The next cycle could be the next post-Trump president who becomes a tyrant. Just like, Hillary or the other ones would become a tyrant, they would become a tyrant that way. So when it becomes, it'll be like, they'll be the false Christ and the false prophets. So that's what I'm saying. There's no solace in the humanity doing as thou wilt for right. It's always going to cycle back down again until God comes and finally separates the wheat from the chaff. And we go into another area where being evil is not an option. And we agree with that. We walk into there and evil is wiped away. That is going to be the glorious time that time is to come. And I was going to talk about some things in the world, but I don't think so. I mean, this is good enough because all I can do is bring up mundane things. These are more important principles. It looks to me like it is the Latter-Days-A-Go-Go as a template. We are going into the latter-day cycle. We're having a tribulation being brewing in front of us. It is real, but it still can change. But the bad news is that if it changes, it'll still cycle back even worse another time. So it's like, all right, well, do we get it over with now, or we cycle it for future generations? Well, that's not our call. Our call is to live the principles of Jesus day by day, whether it's being called before the magistrate or whether it's reaching out and helping somebody who needs help. Remember, Jesus' teachings are rough. That's why you don't hear about them in church. When someone asks you for your shirt, give them your cloak as well. Someone wants you to walk an aisle, go two with them. That's the kind of attitude that the Christian has. This is what we have to do now, and more importantly, do now, because we're in the time. What was it? Jacob's testing and all. If you're going back to the Old Testament stuff, we're in this time. We're in a crucible now. We have to do it, and we can't become tyrants to stop tyrants. How do you stop a psychopath without being one? That's the big question. This is why examples that we get in time, whether it be literal or a story to help us. When Michael, the archangel, stood against Satan, he says, "May the Lord rebuke you." He didn't kick him in the butt like he took his own flesh to do it. He was just an emissary for God. He didn't say, "Hey, I think I can take him myself," or "Lord, let me take him myself. Let me do this." That's all ego. He was, "The Lord rebuke you." And when this stuff happens, when they're killing children and eating them and what all this stuff is outrageous, right? Who knows what they're putting in their food as it is now? May the Lord rebuke you. You have to remember that because you don't want to get pulled into it. Think about the Star Wars. When the Emperor was getting Luke all mad because his father is getting him all angry. The hate. Oh, I feel it, the hate. Yeah. Great. I mean, I'm not saying that, I wouldn't necessarily follow Star Wars for my theology, but it pops up here and again, especially in early times. Early Matrix was good, too, but then it got corrupt again. Things pop up here and again, and it's a window to the soul. And for those who are open and eyes and ears are open, when stuff happens, it comes in. And you go like, "Oh wow." It doesn't give a blank. It doesn't mean that the Wachowski brothers are doing God's will. No. A lot of this stuff happens in spite of them. They don't under ignorance, so stuff comes through. They don't realize the message they're giving because their eyes are closed, ears are open, are closed and eyes are closed, whatever. So keep your eyes open. Keep tethered to Jesus and to God through Jesus. I mean, I'm not even like worshiping Jesus in as much as Jesus came here and allowed God to flow through him to the point, and he is now ascended as a leader. He let God. He's a great example of what we should do. Let God manifest in our lives through him and become an emissary of God. And he is the example of it. And he is behind the scenes still working, and he will come. I mean, I had a pretty dynamic vision of it. If I could think about it, I'll put a link to it. I didn't say anything for weeks because I was I've never had something like this, and I was like, I don't know if I should say anything because it's not about me, and that's why I eventually said it, because it was like, okay, it was just something. I mean, it was for me. If everybody else wants to take it, fine. But God is going to win in the end. The details of how it happens, don't know. But the general outline is that things will get so bad like never happened before and will never happen again, so that if God didn't intervene, all life would be ended. Now, that's pretty darn traumatic. And that's where my faith of getting through this is based in God. And I'm really, really thankful for Jesus. And I also give credit to Jesus the man, because he could have got in the way of all this stuff, like any other human. So, I give credit to Jesus the man who allowed God to live through, and Jesus the man's reward for going along with this is being Jesus the Christ. And so my prayers would that we all do that in our own ways and serve God in these very, very, very rough times. The rougher the times, the more important it is to be the simplest example of Jesus' words of loving one another. So, well, may God bless you all. I'll see you next time.
My old friend, the one who walked before, the one who walked again, the ancient one of old, with wisdom for the new, revive our inner aside. Retell your timeless truths. Oh, each one.
Feet to Fire is a production of IPS Media Works on the OnSync radio network of stations.
I wonder